Hello everyone. In today's video, I would explain the process of integration between PEGA and something called Azure Key Vault. Now, what is Azure Key Vault and why should we use it? So imagine that you are maintaining an application and the application uses certain credentials or certain information by which is supposed to be kept private. So imagine that you have a REST API and the REST API has a username password which is used specifically for that authentication process. Now, in dev environment or test environment, you can maintain it. It's fine. Everyone can know the passwords and they can, for example, use it in, let's say, in Postman or any other emulator tool. But what happens if your application goes to acceptance or production? Now, when that happens, you are actually having certain details of the application. Say, for example, let's say a password, or let's say a file path, or let's say, I don't know, let's say a, a specific user ID. These are all information which is supposed to be kept private, right? Now, how do I ensure that the application details which are supposed to be private are kept private but are available to be used by anyone who actually is authorized to use it? So for that, Azure Key Vault is one of the best tools available in the market. Now again, Azure and its products are not really free, but there are a lot of free services which are provided, but you have to use a subscription, and you have to use that subscription to be able to access all the free services within Azure, Microsoft Azure, that is. There is another open source option called HashiCorp Vault, which is actually available for free, but that is something that I would probably do in a later video. So what exactly is an Azure Key Vault capable of? How exactly can we connect to it? And how can we actually retrieve the information from Azure Key Vault will be the subject of our video. So let's find out how to do it. So before we go into PEGA or any other simulation tool, we need to first make the configurations required in Microsoft Azure. So what I'm currently showing you is the home page for Microsoft Azure. It, as I mentioned before, requires a subscription. You can, I think, use it for 30 days for free, but then you need to give a, I think, credit card or a debit card to use it. Most of the services I'm actually using on this one is actually free, but you need to have a subscription even to use that. So the first change that we need to do is go into something called this app registrations, and we need to create something called an application. Okay, this is different from PEGA's application, of course. As you can see here, I've created a application called PEGA generic POC. If I open it, and when I created it, I automatically got some information. So let's just go through that. First is this application client ID, which is unique to this application which I've just created. The directory tenant ID is the ID for the Azure Active Directory I'm using. So if I go back, you would see that there is this something called Azure Active Directory. I'm using the default directory, so you can see the tenant ID is present here. So these two information are very important. I'll go back to that app registration I was using. So you can see that I'm using the application registration tab. As I mentioned before, this information is very important. Directory tenant ID is also important. There is another thing which is important here. Two more things. First is giving something called an API permission. So what does this say? It says that when you click on this add permission, you can choose which applications you are choosing from here. So which means that whenever you are using any of the APIs of these applications, it will be allowed through. So if for example, let's say you're using an Azure batch API, I'm not using it, but if you're using it from this application, you need to have the Azure batch accesses given to you. So as of now, I'm only going to use Azure Key Vault. So I've only selected Azure Key Vault, and you can see that it actually shows that I have full access to the Azure Key Vault service. Okay, this is one important thing. The second important thing is something called creation of a secret. Now, this is not really the scope of our applications, scope of our discussion for today, but Microsoft Azure services use something called an OAuth authentication. Okay, now OAuth authentication requires the applications which are actually being used to have some sort of a secret value, which will then be used to identify themselves to the authentication service. Okay, So I have already configured a secret value, a secret, and as you can see, this secret already is present here. Now, a very important distinction which a lot of people miss sometimes is this secret ID is not important. This secret value is important. Okay, so there are three things which are really important, as I mentioned. One is this secret value, and second is the application client ID and the directory tenant ID. So these three fields would be important going forward. There's also another tab here called endpoints. The endpoints are also going to be important. So we will explain that when we start using the Azure APIs using Postman. Now, after the app registration is done, we need to go into this PEGA Key Vault. Now this is again something I have created. PEGA key. So whenever you're creating the key vault, it actually asks for some information that what is the subscription ID, what is the directory ID, all those things. I have only given the soft value information. So once this the actual key vault is created, you can then go inside either keys or you can use the secrets option. I've used the secret option. So here you can put in all the values that you want to use. So as you can see here, I have used this PEGA generic secret. You can actually have multiple versions for it. So I will just show you what the value I have given. It's just a simple value called ABCD1234. But the point here is that I have now kept this PEGA generic secret as the attribute which I need. Okay, and the value for that is ABCD1234. So imagine that you have a, let's say, an operator. Let's say if you're using Bix. Now Bix has an operator and a password which is required to log into PEGA. Let's say an acceptance environment or prod environment. So what you will then do is you will come into this key vault. This is the key vault screen. You will then create one more secret called Bix username acceptance, and then you'll create Bix password acceptance, and also one more for production. So once those are created, then you will store the values inside that. So once that value is stored, that cannot be accessed until you have access to the key vault. So it is completely secured and guaranteed by Microsoft Azure. Of course, provided that whoever is using it also has access to your application. So that is a given, but it will not be accessible to anyone who does not have access. Okay. So once the key vault is actually configured, then we are ready to go into PEGA or Postman and then start using it. Now that we have configured Microsoft Azure, next is just a matter of testing out the API endpoints and checking whether everything works correctly and as per expectation or not. Now, before we go into this thing, I would want to point your attention towards this page which has been given by PEGA. Sorry, not PEGA, Microsoft. This actually has all the details that you require while trying to integrate with Microsoft Azure. Now this is a very good set of documents provided by Microsoft. I'll give the link in the video, and once you go through it, you will find all the information that you need. So before we go into the API integration, I always tell everyone who I meet that I like to always test out APIs within Postman first, because Postman allows you to do a lot of flexible configuration, and it's much more flexible to test APIs for the first time instead of doing everything in PEGA. So you get your APIs tested and ready within Postman, and then we can go into PEGA. That's how I always do things. Now, before we go into the endpoint that I need to actually make this work, we need to first understand that there is something else we need as part of authentication and as well as authorization. Now, what is that? Because I have already mentioned that term called OAuth. Now, OAuth authentication is the way in which everything is authenticated within Microsoft Azure API ecosystem. So before we even hit the endpoint, if I, for example, hit an endpoint without passing any other information, it will not work. So I first need to get a token, an access token from Microsoft Azure, and then use that token as part of the request which I would send for the getting the secret value out. Okay, so how is that going to happen? So let's first try that out. Let's first get this token API endpoint working, and then we will talk about how to make the actual secret obtained. and how to get that secret from Azure. For us to get the access token, we need to first use this URL. Now the URL is straightforward enough. You can find this URL also within Microsoft Azure. You need to go back to that app registrations which I had opened before, and on the app registration you will find this endpoints option, and you can get this authorization token endpoint, and you can directly use this endpoint, and it will work fine. Okay, now only the endpoint itself is not enough, of course. Why? Because only the endpoint will not give the required information which Azure demands while making that access token request. So other thing that you need to pass is, first is something called grant type. I think there are 3 or 4 different grant types. One of them I've used is the value I've used is client credentials, which means that I will pass the client information directly to get the authentication or the access token. Second is the client ID, which uniquely identifies my application, which is something that you get from here. This is the client ID I passed. This one, as you can see, it's the same value. I have to also pass client secret. Client secret is that client secret value that I have configured here. And the scope is a static attribute, but you need to pass this. Now this is, all of these are being passed in the body, okay, not on the header. And this would not be passed normally. What we do is we pass raw information and then, for example, use JSON perhaps, but that we can't do here. We have to use XWWW form URL encoded option, and this will be the one in which we have to do. Okay, we can do this in PEGA as well. I'll show that. Once these four request parameters are configured, we need to go to params, and as you can see, there's nothing here. It's just a blank field. Authorization, nothing else is required. It's just these 4 parameters are required. So once you pass these information correctly, you will see that an access token has been generated. So this access token will then be used. I will show you. So this access token is generated. Now this access token effectively gives you access over the scope which we have given, and this has authorized this application, the client ID which I have passed, this client to get the secret from the Azure Key Vault. Now since I have now enabled Azure Key Vault, I have enabled Azure Key Vault from inside the application. I should also be able to use their API. Okay, so I have now used this. I will now use this access token. I'll copy it. I'll go inside the secret. I'll put in all the other information, but here you have to give bearer token option, bearer token, and the token value would be replaced with the new value. Okay, and now there is a expiry date, so you can find it from here. You can go back to that access token. You can see that it expires in 3599. I think with this, I think is in seconds, which means I think about 1 hour. So if I use it after 1 hour, it will again have to be retaken the access token, and then again given on the new request for secret. So once I give the bearer token, I would give the token value which I've just obtained, and then in the body nothing is there because it's a get request for the secret. The authorization token I've already given. Now the other changes which are needed is we need to pass a parameter called API version. Now this I have found out that I think it's only 7.1 which is present. This I think is an API version which Microsoft Azure is using. We also need to pass this very specific vault URL and the vault and a secret name. Now all this information you can get directly from inside the Azure. So what you can do is you can go to this key vault option. You can go in here and you can get the secrets. You can go to secrets, the one that I have configured before. You can go inside the version value and you can find the entire URL given here. So you can just simply copy it over the entire URL. I have also done the same thing, and you can simply put it here and you can then use it. Again, there are some things which I have done. For example, I have not given the so not like this way. You not directly use it, but what you can do is you can simply copy this and you can put the value here. I'll see if I can create one. So you can actually create this. So you can see the value here. Now here, this is the vault URL which you can also get. I think from the Azure Key Vault there is a overview page which gives you, yeah, this one. This is the vault URL. Second is the secrets is a constant value, and then you have to give the vault the secret name, this one, PEGA generic secret. So you have to give the secret name. Okay. Now once you give this, you can go back and see it here. I have given the exact same information, and then you have to give the API version. Okay, you don't have to give the version value. That is not required, although they have given it on within the within the secret, but we don't need that. Okay, I think that is required if you need a specific version of that secret. I have not tried that out, but you can probably use it and then find out. As you can see, since it's a get, there is no body. So the bearer token has been given, the header information has been given, and the parameter information has been supplied, and the URL has been updated accordingly. So if I click on send, as you can see, I am now getting back the value ABCD1234, which I can then use within PEGA. Okay. So this is how you get back the secret value directly within your Postman environment. Now, once this is done, we can now go into PEGA and then start configuring the component necessary for us to make this work within PEGA as well. Once it works in Postman, it's just a matter of configuring it in the same exact steps, and then make that work within PEGA as well. So I have created a component called Azure Key Vault integration component, and yeah, that kind of has some information in it. Now what I have done is I have simply used the two URLs which I just demonstrated. So one of them is first getting the token, and then using the token in the request header, and then getting the secret back. Okay. Now what I've done is I first created a data page. Again, first of all, this is not the first step. I think the first step is to first use the REST integration wizard, which would then allow you to consume those two endpoints, and then you can, of course, after that you can once the wizard is complete for both those endpoints, we can then start using it. I have used a new class which I've created called AKV, Azure Key Vault, that is directly under int dash, otherwise it will not be really a component. But of course, if you're working within an organization, you can use a different base class. So I will not go through that because that is a topic for a different day. But the end result is that if you go to that component, you will find that there are, I think this one I think is better. You can see all these classes have been created, and some REST APIs also have been created for this, and of course some properties. Now what I've done here is I have first created API called get token, a data page called get token. I have configured a connector, a REST connector, and get token request and response. I'll get to it, but first the get token has been first configured, and I have provided the URL in the way it has been given. Now the tenant ID, I think that is something I forgot to show, but on the endpoint for the get token, you need to also provide the tenant ID. Now the tenant ID is given. I did not show it specifically because it was already given as part of the app registration. So you can, again, I'll just refresh it. So you can just go back to the app registration and you can find the endpoint from here. It will also contain the tenant ID. This is the Active Directory tenant ID which I took from here. This is the exact same thing, but I have now configured it here in PEGA. That is the only parameter within the URL. Everything else is a constant value. It will not change. It will not change. And then I've used the post option, and here I have given the, instead of default, which is the standard way of doing things, I have used the URL encoded option for message data, and I've given the 4 different values. Now this scope, secret, ID, and grant type. Now and next what I've done is if I go back to that data page, you will see that in the request I have taken certain things as parameter, and I've taken certain things directly from hard coded it. You can, of course, if you want to change or let's say you have different scopes, you can use it as a parameter as well. But I have, for now, I have simply given the grant type and scope as a hard coded value, and the secret and the ID value I'm taking from a data system setting. So I can go into the DSS. I can show it from here as well. So I have created I have created these values: Azure Vault ID, secret, client ID, and tenant ID. Tenant ID I've already shown, it's already part of the URL. The client ID and client secret are part of the request for the token. And for the parameters, I have only taken the tenant ID. So the tenant ID, which is given on the URL, that is actually being passed from the front end. Again, you can play it around and you can say the the token and the tenant ID is also dynamic, or it is not dynamic. You can also choose that, but I have taken that approach. So once the tenant ID is also given, you can see it here. It is being mapped here under request or tenant ID, and that is being passed directly from the data page. So the request, sorry, not this one, the get token has the request as I showed it. And also the response also is passing the parameters, but you don't need it, but you can simply just use the default option and then simply set the access token from the response post dot access token. Now you can also do some bit of error handling. I have not done that. That was not part of the plan, at least for me, but you can also do that. So the get token has now been configured. So now it's just a matter of simply running it and seeing whether it's working correctly. The tenant ID is defaulted here. I will click on this run. You can see the access token has been generated, which means the data page is working correctly. The last step is to see that d underscore get secret here. Again, this is again has been consumed using the REST wizard. The URL is dynamic and the secret name is dynamic, of course. These have to be passed from somewhere. Now, in the data page, what I've done is I've only taken two parameters. I've taken the API version because this can change from time to time, and the secret name because you can have multiple secrets in an application, right? Suppose you have, let's say, Bix username acceptance, Bix password acceptance, like that, right? So you can then pass different secrets and you will get different values back. So passing the URL itself doesn't really make sense because you would usually only have one key vault URL, but if you're trying to make it really dynamic, you can also pass that. But I have allowed the teams who is actually installing that uh, installing that um, installing that component which I have given. They can configure it directly on this dynamic system setting. They can go into this Azure Vault ID DSS and they can change it to whichever value they have. Now, if you have more than one uh, Azure Key Vault per team or per application, then it will be a problem. So I think if you have that problem, then you can make that as a parameter as well. But I have not done that. It's not that complicated here. So once I have used this, so inside the inside the get secret connect rest, the secret name and vault ID are parameters. They are dynamic values, and the method get has this authorization, which I will get to, and the API version, of course, is being passed directly from the data page. So if I go to the secret value, I go to the request. All of these are pretty straightforward. The tenant I already shown is uh, coming from the DSS, and the vault ID is also coming directly from the Azure Vault ID. The only quirk which I have done is I have actually used this access token. Now, authorize, so it's always very good to remember that when you are actually having a bearer token, so how does this work out? So if actually you're using it, how exactly will that show, right here? So it says bearer token and you have the token, but how do you configure it with PEGA? So you can directly go to the headers and you can see that what headers are being generated, or you can directly go to the results and you can see what headers have been passed. So you can then find a way that, okay, these are the headers I need to pass. I will then have to pass these values. So as you can see, since I've used authorization type is bearer token, the authorization header has been added and the type is given bearer space then the access token. So I have done the exact same thing within PEGA as well. So I've given the header value as authorization, that is the name of the parameter, but the value will be bearer, where is it? Yeah, this one, bearer, then space, and then the token, which would be automatically generated. I pass the tenant ID and then I'm getting the access token. So once I do this, so if I go back and then run that data page, I have already defaulted the values here. If I pass it, you can see the information response.get, you can see the values coming back. directly from Azure Key Vault. Now I have also configured it within a screen on PEGA, so you can see that I have created a generate second case, and I have added a like a drop down. So you don't usually use it this way, but if you, for example, have a requirement like this, you can simply choose this. It will automatically choose the value and then show it on the screen. Now usually this is not a standard way of using it, but I wanted to have a visual representation of what I did, so I did this. But usually what happens, as I mentioned, that you always, suppose you actually have, let's say, a username password which you need to use to log into an application. So what you do is you always use this. Or sometimes what happens is there are certain organizations which use API keys. So you can, for example, have, let's say, certain mediator softwares like Oracle API Gateway. They will give you, let's say, an API key, and that would be then stored within Azure Key Vault. And then what you can do is every time you are passing the request header, let's say within an API. So let's say you are passing here the tenant ID, you would then pass the API key. So this API key then will then it will then come from your Azure Key Vault. So that is how it actually works, and it is a very straightforward way of doing things. It's just a matter of using REST APIs. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. I would try to answer it. I always go through your comments, so if you have a question, please reach out to me. Otherwise, if you like something about the video, let me know. If you don't like about it, also let me know about that. And also please like, share, subscribe to my video. Thank you.